Hello, viewers. It's Josie. Welcome back to Eclectic Movie Reviews. And today I will be doing in-depth discussions on Eddington and weapons. Now, I was going to make this video, uh, a me reviewing Naked Gun, uh, on becoming a guinea fowl, Eddington weapons. But then I decided, you know what? I'm gonna just do a big in-depth analysis of both Eddington and weapons. Because okay, I just want to say I love Naked Gun. I thought it was hysterical. But I really don't have that much else to say about it other than that I love the corny literal humor. And that made me laugh a lot. But maybe I'll go more into it in another video down the line, but let's just get right into it. Let's start with my analysis of Eddington. Oh, and if you haven't seen either Eddington or Weapons, I suggest you click away. But even if you haven't and don't care about spoilers, you can watch if you want to, but I highly suggest go see them and then come back to this video another time. So, Eddington. Cool. Let's talk. So, I'm going to divide this video by the points I want to make. So first things first. Astor is both compassionate and critical towards Joe Cross. A lot has been said already about how Astor satirizes both sides. Well, he has pushed back on the idea of this being a centrist film. Now, he's mentioned that although he's more left-leaning, he did not want to make a partisan film because he didn't want to make for an interesting story. He wanted to stay truer to the moment. Like even though he's critical. In other words, even though he's critical of what can happen on both sides, he leans a little more left. Well, I'd say he leans more common sense. But let's just get into more of what I want to say. Now, during COVID, Astor lived in New Mexico, his hometown, and he basically studied neighborhoods for research. There was a local sheriff whom he consulted with, and he sort of modeled Joe Cross after him. He added that he wanted to get perspectives from both conservative and liberal members of the towns. By doing so, he gained compassion and understanding from what these people were coming from in terms of their frustrations. If we're discussing compassion, Ari Aster has that, but is also critical of Joe Cross. Let's just cut it to the chase. Joe Cross is not a good guy. He has sympathetic qualities. He does care about his community. Joe also loves his wife, played by Emma Stone. As she pulls away from him being caught up in conspiracies, I think Astor wants you to feel a level of sympathy for Joe. At the same time, Joe is not that great of a sheriff as he believes himself to be. He's no stranger to brutality. Now, although Astor very much points out the extreme corrective performative activism on the left, in no way does he excuse racism. Now, let's move on to the second point I want to make. That brings me to point number 2. Questioning the intentions behind movements and choices. One of the aspects of Eddington that make it effective as a commentary on political movements is that it questions the intentions behind them. Are people joining them because they actually want to make a change in the world? Or are they doing it because it is trendy and they could perhaps gain attention and followers? In a couple of interviews, he discussed the difference between Brian and Sarah's reasons for joining BLM, Black Lives Matter. He said that although Sarah's circle of peers can get carried away, she's actually coming from a more sincere place, whereas Brian basically just wants to romantically impress her. Brian becoming a right-wing influencer with a hot new girlfriend only further exemplifies his intention of external validation and scoring chicks. There was a tweet from Nuance Film Takes that said, Brian's journey from being a BLM protester to pursue a girl to becoming a conservative influencer to capitalize on rescuing Joe is a pretty searing indictment on white privilege. Now, while I do think he does care about the town of Eddington, I do think that his intentions for becoming mayor are more so coming from a place of frustrated retaliation than it is him actually wanting to be mayor and taking on the responsibilities. This is made evident by his smear campaigning and killing Ted Garcia, Pedro Pascal's character. Now, Ted's campaign tactics are a little more ethical than Sheriff Cross's, but at the end of the day, he's in it for himself too. A big part of Ted Garcia's mayoral candidacy is getting money from tech donors for the data center from Solid Gold Megacorp, if I believe it's called. Their data center being built. Mayor Garcia also demonstrates hypocrisy by telling the citizens to remain quarantined and wear masks, but he has an election party at his house. Now let's talk about the standoff confrontation between Joaquin Phoenix and Pedro Pascal's characters, where Joe tells him he's running for mayor. What's interesting about that scene is that both of them, in their own way, are justified. While I personally would not have taken my mask off in public during COVID, Joe did make a valid point about not gaslighting or dehumanizing other individuals. Ted is also right about the fact that it is ridiculous of Joe to try to run for mayor when he can't keep his office together. Again, at the end of the day, Ted Garcia's biggest priority is the money from the tech donors. Let's move on to the character of Michael. Now, I'm gonna get into some tricky territory here. It's ironic how the guy, Mikael Ward, who plays the moral center of this movie, is perhaps the biggest monster of the cast in real life. And in that he was anyway, the actor Mikael Ward was back in July was charged for rape. Obviously, I was justice for his victims. In no way am I plotting such despicably disgusting actions. Absolutely not. Anyway, I'm gonna separate the art from the artist here and talk about the character in terms of the storytelling. It's because now what I find interesting about Michael is that he's conflicted. I see him as the audience stand-in. He wants to serve the community and bring justice, but he questions the ethics behind it all. In one of the protest scenes, Sarah asks Michael why he's even part of the police squad as a black man. On the other hand, Sheriff Joe Cross, Guy, and Michael have every right to ensure that there is no public looting from the protesters. On the other hand, Sarah does have a point. You know? After all, it is hinted in the film that Sheriff Cross has sort of favored Guy in the past. The Guy played by Luke Grimes, I believe. And at the end, when Michael's living outside of Eddington and shooting somewhere, I think he knows that Joe Cross is behind the murders of Ted Garcia and his son. I think he suspects something. Now, Ari Aster said he thought of doing like a sort of spin-off to Eddington. If he were to make one, I would love to see a continuation of Michael's story as a rugged cop with scars on his face, totally disillusioned with society and suspecting who's behind it all. Having faith in Ari Aster always getting good performances out of his actors, recasting the role of Michael would be a logical route. Anyway, I wish justice for the victims of Mikael Ward. Let's move on to the final point I want to make about Eddington is the real villain beyond political party. When Joe is in a vegetable or vegetative state after getting stabbed in the head, both his wish to become mayor and his worst fear of losing all control are manifested. He has no autonomy in a vegetative state. His crazy mother-in-law basically does the mayoral work for him. it is blatant that Ari Aster is pointing out how politicians can be fronts while others pull the strings behind the scenes. I want to get to the two major points that Ari Aster has made regarding Eddington that stood out to me the most. First, he pointed out that COVID was the breaking point that amplified how people are no longer living in a shared conceptual version of the world. Everyone is living in different realities, Ari Aster said. Now, I think what he means is that with the internet and media platforms, it makes people more stubbornly glued to their beliefs, not willing to listen to others. Furthermore, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the leadership is left or right wing, because the real villain, if you will, is in the narrative is the big tech and AI taking over the world. In fact, in quite a few interviews, Ari Aster has described the characters as essentially being training data for the data center. And I think it is clever of Aster to start and end the narrative with an image of the data center. The big tech companies profit off of fear and polarization, along with the hijacking of our attentions that is damaging to our brains and impacting the natural environment. In fact, recent reports warn of data centers sucking up water supply. I want to bring up this book. I brought it up on this channel a couple of years ago, but I want to bring it up again, and that is Universal Human by Gary Zukav, which is an amazing book. I love Gary Zukav. He's one of the best philosophers working today. Now, Gary Zukav, in a lot of his books and talks, he brings up how the human species is slowly transitioning from 5 sensory perception to multisensory perception. He said that 5 sensory perception, people made choices based on intentions rooted in fear, which led to painful consequences and experiences. But multisensory perception, on the other hand, choices rooted in love, care, reverence for life, compassion are what evolve the human species further. And he calls this new era. Basically, the term universal human is referring to this new species of people who are becoming, more aware of their actual intentions, and learning about the power of compassion, reverence for life, and intentions based on joy and meaning, if that makes sense. Now, I want to read two excerpts that connect to Eddington well. And in this chapter right here, he's talking about social structures. He says, we can replace capitalism with socialism, but we cannot change the social structure of economics. We can replace dictatorship with democracies, but we cannot change the social structure of governance. We can replace fact-based curricula with faith-based curricula, but we cannot change the social structure of education. Our changes are trivial compared to the processes that produce social structures. Only changing human consciousness itself could change the processes that produce human social structures. And now he has a whole chapter on multisensory governance, and this is what he says here. Democracy is the highest mountain in the range of 5 sensory governance, have always been cauldrons of conceit, deceit, treachery, and mean-spiritedness. In other words, pursuit of external power. Nonetheless, their advantages were great. Losers of political wars, even the most brutal, could regroup, plan again, and attack in greater force in the next election, instead of being killed. Winners entrenched grew stronger and attacked again with advantage, as incumbents in the next election. All of this is now counterproductive to the evolution of multisensory humans. No matter how many 5 sensory governments we create or destroy, how intelligent, sensitive, refined, and caring, or how vile venomous, crude, and violent are the individuals we elect to them, the five sensory social structure of governance now leads only to violence and destruction. Now, in Eddington, clearly these many of the individuals are operating based on fear-based intentions and, as Gary Zukav puts it, frightened parts of their personalities. Now, let's move. I want to bring up, before we move on to weapons, I want to name a couple films that I think could pair well with Eddington. And those are The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from 1962, the John Ford film. Actually, at this, when it premiered at Cannes, I saw a tweet calling Eddington the anti-Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. One False Move, Carl Franklin's film from 92, could be an interesting pairing, and also Lone Star from 96. That's a John Sayles film. Now, let's go over to weapons. Now, this is interesting because sorry, lost my bookmark here. I'll use this. First off, this was so much fun to see with the crowd. Hearing audience reactions always makes for a great theatrical experience, of course. Now, sorry, reaching for a bookmark. Okay. Many critics have gone into weapons trying to decipher the quote-unquote deeper meaning. Now, Zach Kreger has said in interviews that he did not necessarily intend for any sociopolitical allegory. I am not calling him out and saying that he's wrong. Whether he was intending such commentary or not, there are certainly themes in this film that reflect contemporary issues that are quite frankly not discussed enough. Ryan McQuaid of Awards Watch proposed the possibility that he intended for allegory, but didn't want to address such issues, given that we are in such a, as Eddington depicts, politically divisive time, and he didn't want to turn audiences away from the film. Now, one thing that Zach Kreger has admitted in interviews is that he wrote this when he was grieving the death of Trevor Moore, a member of the Whitest Kids You Know sketch comedy group, with which Kreger was once a part of. For those of you who do not know, Trevor Moore died after blunt force head trauma from him falling off his balcony. The toxicology report indicated alcohol usage. Trevor Moore would be very proud of this film's success. Some have theorized that it could be an allegory of school shootings. You could definitely make a case. Beyond that, I see weapons as an allegory for the societal failure of making a safe, thriving environment for children. For a long time, there's been this lame excuse, it's about the children! No, it's not. That's just a political campaign buzzwords. Now, when the kids go missing, it becomes more of a finger-pointing witch hunt, more than some question of, is the children alive and safe? I mean, not that they don't care, but not that like the parents aren't, any way worried about the kids. Of course they are. It's just, there's people are weaponizing, as the title suggests, their grief and trauma over the, for blame, so that they don't have to deal with their, discomfort, and which is, of course, justified. Absolutely. But, anyway, there's just healthy ways to go about it and non-healthy ways to go about it. Now, let's bring up one societal failure, and that is the failure of the education system. When we are first introduced to the teacher Justine Gandy, played by Julia Garner, we assume by horror movie trope standards that she is a smart and innocent quote-unquote final girl who everyone should be turning to, but nobody's listening to. That is not exactly the case. The finger pointing at Justine for the tragedy is not earned, but this does not in any way make her a saintly angel. She was let go from her previous teaching position due to sexual relations with another faculty member. She's an alcoholic and she sleeps with her married or engaged ex. I believe I can't remember if he's married or engaged, but her ex Paul, played by Alden Ehrenreich, who is a crooked cop who also has a history of alcoholism. It is fair to question if Justine following Alex home has less to do with protecting him and more to do with clearing her name so that she doesn't get any more blame. And obviously, Justine is well-meaning in that she would rather want safety instead of danger for Alex. But at the end of the day, she is more concerned. I do think she is, at that moment, she is more concerned with clearing her name than what actually is best for Alex. Now, one can make the same assertion with Marcus as well. Of course, he too would rather the children be safe than not, but his priorities at the end of the day are the school politics. He wants to push forward normalcy as a way to sweep things under the rug, if you will. All things considered, I do believe that Justine's heart is mostly in the right place, even if her ways of going about it are not always professional. Now, we don't get a full sense of how good of a teacher Justine actually is, given that there's only a few shots of Alex as the only one in the classroom. I wonder what the kids' test scores are. In fact, academic performance is never mentioned. I wonder how academic performance would be affected, considering how it's mentioned by the narrator at the end that many kids didn't speak right away. Some are learning to talk again. Now, overall, looking at everything in the narrative regarding the school points out, you can make the meaning, if you will, this part of the narrative, pointing out the failure of the education system as well as threats to American education. Is it about the students or is it about the teachers and their reputation? Because some schools, they want the best test score so that, they're featured in magazines, or online, or listed online as top schools, All right. So what happens when children aren't a priority? Although this is the next point I want to make. As far as failure of society's failure of caring for children. Although Justine is the first person to notice that something's odd going on at Alex's house, she's not the hero who saves all the kids, nor the police. In fact, as I sort of brought up earlier, the police are incompetent. Paul's too caught up in his own personal matters. One character who certainly has self-serving intentions behind helping the kids is James the junkie. He wants to earn the reward money. Even so, Kreger does show compassion for James. He's not an evil person. Not at all. He's trying to get by in ways that aren't legal. And because he, that's where he's in this unfortunate economic circumstance. Although Kreger writes him as a tragically sympathetic, he's not excusing his petty criminality to the point of saintlyhood. The socioeconomics of the kids in the class are not really touched upon. However, if any of them grew up financially struggling or in dysfunctional families, they could be susceptible to drug addictions in the future, like James. Let's bring up parental role models. It is hinted at that Josh Brolin's character Archer was not necessarily the best father. His marriage is not in the best place. As he's sleeping in his son's room, then again, he's grieving his son missing. He's not shown talking to his wife. And what I find interesting is that when we get Alex's perspective, we learn that Archer's son Matthew was bullied. And in that case, it is possible that he may have not been a good role model to his son. Archer didn't even tell Matthew, apparently, if I'm recalling correctly, Archer didn't even tell Matthew that he loved him. I think there's a scene, it's I should have told him that I loved him. Since Josh Brolin's character was a sports star, he wanted his son to be one too. Perhaps he pushed him too hard and it led to, manifestations in form of such behaviors. Now, what is the meaning behind Aunt Gladys's witchcraft? Zach Kreger's father was an alcoholic. He grew up an alcoholic parent, and I believe Zach Kreger himself experienced it for 10 and is now 10 years sober, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I believe I found that in research. I don't know if that's correct or not. Now, some reviewers have wondered if Aunt Gladys's voodoo could perhaps be connected to alcoholism or drug use. And actually, Zach Kreger himself says that, I'll get to that just a second. There is a visual motif of a triangle inside of a circle, which resembles the AA symbol. I want to read an excerpt of an interview Hollywood Reporter did with Zach Kreger. Kreger said, "The final chapter with Alex and his parents is autobiographical. Living with an alcoholic parent inverts family dynamics. A foreign entity enters your home, warps your parent, and forces you into survival mode without the tools to cope. Gladys's parasitic power, like a disease, is one that is transmissible and it consumes its host. Alcoholism is not contagious per se, but it can be socially contagious and hereditary. But it is not contagious like a virus, of course. Justine, Paul, and James are not evil characters, but Gladys's consuming power mirrors the addictions which consumes these characters. She's a manifestation. If this arc of the film is a substance abuse allegory, then Alex feeding his parents soup while they are in a vegetative state is metaphorical for children learning to take care of their parents when they have drug and alcohol problems. Alex could certainly make use of resources for mental health support. Granted, Aunt Gladys forces Alex to keep what is going on at home a secret. PTA meeting, Marcus describes the school as being in a time of healing. I don't recall school psychologists or social workers in being in the film, and they're not shown that. But I think that is certainly something that not only the students could use, but also the adults in the town. None of the characters are seen discussing any of the issues with the mental health professionals. Instead, they keep it all inside. Of course, at the end of the day, it all comes down to personal choices, but for the most part, any form of psychological support is more beneficial than not. Though Alex and Aunt Gladys's arc and the spirals of the other through Alex and Aunt Gladys's arc and the spirals of the other characters, we are reminded of the importance of individuals having access to such resources that offer mental health support. Now, it's not. It has improved. Though I don't know how what the state of it will be with, current events in this country, but let's not get into that. But although mental health services have improved over the years, there of course always is room for improvement. And, it's also a good question of accessibility, affordability, Now, it is mentioned at the end that Alex is brought to a foster home. The unnamed narrator states that they are nice. Obviously, that is from her perspective, and it is possible that she could be an unreliable narrator, as she is very young and prevented from knowing everything. That is a limitation of her being the narrator, on top of the fact that we don't know who she is. For all we know, Alex could be an abusive foster home, and that is something that unfortunately happens in real life. So, that's an issue that the film is bringing up. Ryan McQuaid of Awards Watch pointed out how if we're looking at weapons as a school shooting allegory, which Zach Kreger insists that it isn't, and I believe him there. I think I believe that it touches on other things beyond school shootings. But But if we're looking in that regard, then Alex beating the other kids in the class in the class soup could represent how school shooting survivors experiencing survivor's guilt may feel obliged to take care of others. He recently did an in-depth spoiler conversation with Christina Yearling-Bierlo on her Pop Culture Confidential podcast, and when discussing how the children losing their ability to speak while possessed, Ryan connected it to how when politicians make bad decisions and the policies have a negative ripple effect on the country as a whole, children have no say in the matter. Many reviewers have rightfully pointed out how the narrator saying some of them are learning to talk again at the end parallels not only many children, but human beings struggling to talk after major traumatic experiences. Ryan McQuaid added to that point, saying that oftentimes after traumatic events like school shootings, children essentially lose their voice, and their parents are the ones speaking for them. On a broader scale, I equate Aunt Gladys's evil witchcraft with the many forms of hate in this country that manifests into violence. Such hate is parasitic and contagious. The way it affects the children in our country is something that is being overlooked. Whether intentional or not, Zach Kreger reminds us in Weapons via horror elements how we adults could do a better job at examining how our choices affect the lives of our children. Now, films that I think could pair well with Weapons: Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs from 1991, Todd Solondz's Happiness from 1998, Todd Field's Little Children from 2006, Trick or Treat from 2007, and the 2018 TV miniseries on HBO, Sharp Objects, I think would be a really interesting companion piece to Weapons. Now, what do both Weapons and Eddington have in common? They are both portraits of towns that represent a microcosm of the dangers of a paranoid society where pointing fingers and being right becomes more important than safety and well-being. They depict people operating on frightened parts of their personalities and how that affects livelihoods. And yeah, that's what I have to say about Eddington and Weapons. Two films that so far I would list as my favorites of the year so far. We're heading into film festival season, so that's exciting, and I will be back with more reviews of movies coming out this fall, and also first time watches of mine. Thank you for watching. I hope everybody had a fantastic summer. Goodbye for now.